Hello, thanks for joining me for the inaugural episode of Ask a Dad. This forum's going to be kind of fatherly advice on all sorts of topics. However, it's the beginning of October, and the first fatherly advice I would give is you want to read a good book. And because it's Halloween, there's all kinds of different books that are out there. And I've noticed on YouTube there are a plethora of Stephen King forums to rank and talk about all of his books, and he's definitely the master of horror. However, I wanted to offer four of the greatest novels that you might want to consider looking into. The first novel that I would recommend is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It was written in 1959. It's a gothic horror novel that's considered to be one of the greatest ghost stories of the 20th century. And there's a recent Netflix series that I have to admit I haven't seen, but this is a truly creepy book. It involves four characters who try to scientifically explore a house to find evidence of the supernatural. And back in 1981, Stephen King mentioned it as one of the greatest horror books of the last part of the 20th century. And for those who are familiar with Neil Gaiman, who is a very popular, fantastical writer, he considers it the scariest book he's ever read. So you might want to look into that one. Another true classic is called Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. It was published in 1967, a horror occult novel. And in fact, it was the best-selling horror novel of the entire 1960s. It was credited for creating the whole horror boom that followed in the 60s and 70s. And in 1968, a year later, a movie was made that's regarded as a classic. The movie is one of the most critically acclaimed horror movies ever made. Metacritic gave it a score of 96 out of 100 based upon 15 critics. This is a great one if you want to read the book and see a fantastic movie that accompanies it. The third selection is by Richard Matheson, I Am Legend, which he wrote in 1954. It's a post-apocalyptic vampire/zombie novel. He's kind of the grandfather of modern horror. He took horror to a whole different place and became a big influence on Stephen King and George Romero of the famed zombie movies. There have been three film adaptations. The Last Man on Earth in 1964, The Omega Man in 1971, and I Am Legend in 2007. The last two adaptations have nothing to do with the novel. I shouldn't say that. I mean, they're loosely based on it, but truly, everyone's familiar with Will Smith's version, but it has very little to do with the novel. And that might be a fun thing to do, read the novel and see a totally different interpretation. Last, and certainly not least, is the 1971 book The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, which I consider not only the greatest horror novel of all time, but also the greatest horror movie of all time. This is not for the faint of heart. It deals with dark paranormal suspense and demonic possession. So it's tough stuff, especially when you realize that it's based on a real case of demonic possession back in 1949. That the author heard about when he was attending Georgetown University. Part of the reason why I think the movie is such a masterpiece, too, is that Blatty wrote the screenplay based upon his own novel, so he really knew the work. And the director, William Friedkin, is an absolute master. So this is a little harsher fare, but I truly believe it's the best horror book and movie ever. So if you really want something good, this is it. It would be irresponsible for me especially being that this is Ask a Dad, and as a dad, I know that this is very age inappropriate, appropriate material, depending upon how old and how mature you are. So I would advise you to, before you pick up any of these books, pass them past your parents. Make sure that they give you the stamp of approval so that it isn't too disturbing. I read a lot of these books in high school and was fine with it, but there are different sensibilities, and I don't want anyone to have any kind of a problem. So just make sure that your parents give the stamp of approval, and watch out for my new videos. And thanks for listening. Happy Halloween.